Hello Zenith women and welcome to the channel. The world doesn't hate powerful women, it just panics when it can't control them. Let that sink in. Because what if I told you, you're not misunderstood, you're misclassified. You're not the villain in their narrative, you're the entire architecture of a new reality they can't comprehend. You see, research shows that independent, self-reliant women are often labeled as difficult, not because they are, but because they don't play by the emotional script society wrote for them. And Sigma females, they don't just rewrite the script, they burn the whole play. People will call you cold, intimidating, too much, or not enough, depending on the day of the week and their personal insecurities. But here's the truth they don't want to admit. You're not the problem, you're the prototype, the blueprint, the original design they'll try to copy after rejecting it. And yes, they'll act like you're hard to love, but that's only because you're not built for people who love chaos more than peace. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into 20 brutally honest, painfully accurate, and wildly liberating reasons why you're not broken. You're built differently. And if that makes you too much, tell them to try being not enough somewhere else. Number 1, you don't overshare, so they assume you're cold. You don't overshare, and that drives some people crazy. In a world where everyone is constantly updating their lives online, posting what they ate, how they feel, who hurt them, and what they're doing every second of the day, you're the one who stays quiet. You don't feel the need to turn your life into a highlight reel. You don't open up to just anyone. And for that reason alone, people start labeling you cold, mysterious, emotionally unavailable. But let's be real, none of those are true. You're not cold, you're cautious. You're not hiding, you're filtering. You've just learned the hard way that not everyone deserves front row seats to your life. Some people listen just to collect information, not because they care. And when you figured that out, you stopped performing, you pulled back, you became more selective, more private, more intentional. That's not a weakness, that's power. But here's what really bothers people. They can't read you. They can't figure out what you're thinking, what you're planning, or how you feel. And in a world where people are addicted to control, not being able to predict you makes them uncomfortable. You don't give them emotional breadcrumbs to follow. You don't give them anything to dissect. You keep your energy tight and your world even tighter. And so they start calling you things that make them feel better, like cold or distant, because your boundaries make them question why they overshare so much. The truth is, people expect women to be emotionally open at all times, vulnerable, expressive, constantly explaining themselves. But you flip that script. You're not cold. You just don't believe in bleeding in front of people who'd use your wounds against you. That's not being heartless. That's having standards. That's knowing your value. That's understanding the difference between being known and being seen. You don't overshare because you know your peace is sacred. And if that makes people uncomfortable, let them be. You weren't born to be understood by everyone. You were born to be respected by the right ones. Number 2, you're intimidating because you're not easily entertained. You don't laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You don't clap for people just because everyone else is clapping. And you definitely don't lose your mind over flashy things that mean absolutely nothing. That alone makes you a threat in rooms full of people performing for attention. You're not easily entertained because you see through the act, the filters, the borrowed confidence, the desperation behind the noise. And that unnerves people more than anything. You've got a calmness that cuts through chaos. While everyone else is hyped up by fake status and surface-level energy, you're sitting there, unmoved, unimpressed, and absolutely uninterested. Not because you're judgmental, but because your mind is tuned into a different frequency. You crave depth, truth, and energy that doesn't need to announce itself. So when someone pulls out the latest car, brags about who they know, or flexes their followers like it's personality, you just blink and wait for the conversation to get real. And that's the problem, for them. They don't know how to function without your approval. They expect everyone to play along, to nod, to laugh, to validate. But when you don't, it hits them right in their ego. Suddenly your stillness feels like rejection. Your peace feels like arrogance. But what's really happening is this. They've never had to perform for someone who wouldn't bite the bait. You're not hard to impress. You just know the difference between energy and ego. You don't chase highs that don't last. You don't pretend to connect when the vibe is off. and you definitely don't entertain what doesn't feed your soul. That level of realness is rare, it's raw. And honestly, it's terrifying to people who survive off attention, not connection. So no, you're not boring, you're not cold, you're not too serious. You're just done pretending. You'd rather sit in silence than fake a laugh. You'd rather be alone than around noise that says nothing. And that's why they call you intimidating. Because in a world addicted to fake, your realness is a wake-up call. Number 3, you end relationships when most are begging to stay. You don't stay just because you're comfortable. You don't keep people in your life just because of history, promises, or potential. If the connection starts to disturb your peace, if the energy shifts from nourishing to draining, you'll walk. Quietly, completely, and without the need to explain yourself 100 times. That's not being cold-hearted. That's being self-aware. Most people hang on long after the relationship has expired. They negotiate with disrespect, try to fix what's already broken, and confuse loyalty with self-abandonment. But you've learned that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. You can care deeply, give fully, and still choose to walk away when the love becomes heavy, inconsistent, or conditional. That kind of strength doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from clarity. You understand something most people don't. Staying in the wrong connection doesn't prove your love, it erases your peace. You've stopped glorifying struggle. You're not interested in constantly explaining your worth, begging to be heard, or trying to fix people who don't want to grow. That's not love, that's emotional labor disguised as devotion, and you refuse to carry it. What confuses people is how final you are. They think you're supposed to come back, to check in, to reopen the door eventually. But when you end it, it's not a threat. It's not a cry for attention. It's a decision, a line drawn in self-respect. No drama, no public display. Just silence and a closed chapter. That's why some people will say you're too quick to cut people off. But it's not about being quick, it's about how many chances they got before your energy said enough. Because when you're tired of pretending, tired of being hurt, tired of talking and nothing changing, leaving doesn't feel harsh, it feels like healing. And no, you don't feel guilty about it. You've done the work, you've grieved while still in the relationship, you've tried, held on and hoped. So when you walk away, it's not because you don't care, it's because you finally realized peace is the ultimate closure. Number 4, you make people question their entire identity. You don't have to say much. You just are. The way you carry yourself, the way you think, the way you move through the world without begging for approval. It shakes people. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because your very presence challenges everything they've built their identity around. You don't follow trends, you follow truth. You don't bend yourself into shapes to fit into rooms. You either fit or you leave. And that alone makes people pause, because most of them are living on borrowed personalities, doing what's popular, saying what's safe, being who they think they should be. But you don't do masks. You don't do watered down. You show up as the raw, unfiltered version of yourself. And it makes people uncomfortable in ways they can't explain. Some admire it. They sit quietly, watching you, almost studying. They don't always say it, but in their heads they're wondering, how does she live like that and not care what anyone thinks? It makes them reflect on the parts of themselves they've been silencing. It makes them rethink the choices they made just to be accepted. Others? They avoid you. Not because you did something wrong, but because you remind them of everything they're not ready to face. You shine light in places they've kept dark for years. Around you, they can't fake it. They can't hide behind the usual nonsense because your energy doesn't allow shallow. It demands real. It's not your words, it's your alignment. You've spent time figuring out who you are, and now you move with a kind of certainty that doesn't flinch. That's rare. That's powerful, and that's exactly why some people love you while others feel deeply triggered just being in the same room. Because when you walk in truth, you become a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see themselves without the filter. Number 5, you don't chase anyone, so they call you aloof. You're not the one blowing up someone's phone. You're not crafting perfect responses to spark interest or analyzing every text for hidden meaning. If the connection is real, it flows. If it's forced, you release it. That calm, grounded way you handle relationships, it shakes people. Because in a world where everyone's busy chasing, proving, and performing, you're just being. And that confuses people who only understand desperation disguised as effort. You've probably been called distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable by people who expected you to beg for their energy. But the truth is, you're not chasing because you don't need to. You're not operating from a place of lack. You know your worth, and you're not trying to convince anyone else of it. If someone sees it, great. If not, that's not your problem. It's not that you don't care. It's that you care differently. You care without clinging. You love without losing yourself. You show up fully, but only where you're valued. And that's foreign to people who are used to attention being a form of currency. They don't know how to respond to someone who won't compete for their time, who won't tolerate breadcrumbs, and who won't stick around waiting to be chosen. So instead, they call you aloof. It's easier for them to believe you're emotionally disconnected than to admit that you're just not willing to lower your standards. You don't chase because you've mastered the art of attracting. You know that the right connections don't require you to hustle for love or shrink yourself for approval. They're mutual, natural, and solid, and honestly, you've probably seen what happens when you do chase. How it turns into a power imbalance, a guessing game, a constant drain. That's not love, that's emotional gymnastics, and you're done with that. So no, you're not aloof. You're just free. Free from attachment to things that don't serve you. Free from the need to perform for connection. And that kind of peace, it's magnetic, but only to those who are equally whole. Number 6, you reject the herd, so they label you difficult. You don't nod just because everyone else is nodding. You don't go along to get along. If something doesn't sit right with your spirit, you question it, even if you're the only one in the room doing so. That makes people uncomfortable, especially those who find safety in groupthink. You're not rebellious for the sake of drama. You're just not built to move with the herd when the herd is headed straight into a ditch. You've got your own mind, your own rhythm, your own internal compass that doesn't rely on popular opinion or cultural noise to function. That independence, it threatens people who only feel powerful in numbers. They don't know what to do with someone who thinks for herself, speaks when she's ready, and doesn't need a crowd to feel validated. So they slap the word difficult on you as if your refusal to be controlled is a flaw. They want compliance, not clarity. They want you to smile and nod, not challenge or question. But that's not you. You weren't born to follow blind rules, perform fake respect, or pretend you agree just to keep the peace. You value authenticity over acceptance. And that scares the ones who have built their entire personality on playing nice. They call you difficult because they can't manipulate you. They call you hard to work with because you won't tolerate half-baked ideas, lazy leadership, or surface-level nonsense. You demand excellence, first from yourself, then from others. And let's be real, mediocrity hates high standards. It hates being exposed. And that's exactly what your presence does. It reveals the cracks in fake systems, in fake friendships, and in fake confidence. You're not difficult. You're discerning. You're not a rebel. You're a blueprint for what self-trust looks like in a world begging people to conform. You're not here to make others comfortable. You're here to live in truth. And if that truth makes waves, so be it. You weren't born to blend in. You were born to break molds. Number 7, you set boundaries and they call it selfish. You say no, and suddenly you're the problem. You take your time back and people call you cold. But let's be honest. What they really miss isn't you, it's their access to you. The version of you that overextended, stayed silent, said yes out of guilt, and kept showing up even when it drained the life out of you. That's what they're mourning, the control, not the connection. The moment you draw a line, the masks start to fall. People who once claimed they loved you start to act offended by your growth. They say you've changed, as if evolving is betrayal. They guilt-trip you, twist your boundaries into blame, and paint your peace as selfishness. But here's the truth. You're not selfish for protecting your energy. You're strategic. You've simply learned that pouring into the wrong people doesn't make you generous. It makes you empty. The old you used to over-explain. You used to soften your no with excuses, hoping they'd understand. Not anymore. You've stopped making yourself uncomfortable so others can remain unbothered. You don't exist to be everyone's emotional dumping ground, cheerleader, or backup plan. You've realized that peace isn't found in keeping everyone happy. It's found in refusing to betray yourself just to be liked. People who respected you never had a problem with your boundaries. It's always the ones who were benefiting from your lack of them who make the most noise. They're mad that you woke up. That you stop being so easy to access, so quick to rescue, so willing to self-abandon just to keep a fake connection afloat. You're not selfish, you're just done playing the martyr. You're done draining yourself for people who wouldn't do half the same for you. And if your boundaries make someone uncomfortable, that's not your cue to shrink. It's their cue to self-reflect. So let them call you selfish. Let them whisper. Let them go. Because the truth is, the only people who are offended by your boundaries are the ones who were never planning to honor them in the first place. Number 8, you make solitude look luxurious. You don't sit around waiting for someone to complete you. You're already whole, and that alone disrupts the foundation of how most people view connection. They were taught to believe that being alone is a punishment, that solitude is a sign of emptiness or failure. But you turned it into a kingdom, a sanctuary, a space of power. You don't tolerate being alone, you choose it. Not because you hate people, but because your peace has become too expensive to sell for cheap attention. You've built rituals in silence. You've had conversations with yourself that healed what noise never could. While others chase constant validation to feel seen, you learned how to witness yourself. You didn't just get comfortable with your own company, you made it sacred. And let's be honest, that breaks people. It makes them uncomfortable. Because they measure their worth by who wants them, who texts back, who likes their post, who chooses them in a room. But you're not playing that game. You don't need to be surrounded to feel valuable. You know the difference between being alone and being lonely. One feels like starvation. The other feels like sovereignty. You've turned your solitude into a fortress. You work in silence, you rest in silence, you rise in silence. That kind of discipline, that kind of confidence, it's intimidating. Because people can't manipulate someone who isn't afraid to walk alone. They can't guilt you into staying, control you with attention, or bait you with fear of abandonment. You've already made peace with being your own anchor. They'll try to label you cold, distant, or too independent. But what they're really saying is, I can't figure out how to make you need me. And that's the most dangerous kind of woman, one who isn't waiting to be saved, chosen, or fixed. You don't just survive in solitude, you glow in it, you lead yourself, you hold space for yourself, you protect your own energy like a luxury brand protects its name, with intention, with value, and with zero apologies. That's not loneliness, that's leadership, and it's the kind of power you don't need to speak about because it's felt the moment you walk in the room. Number 9, you refuse to perform femininity for male approval. You've watched it happen 100 times. Strong, intelligent women shape-shifting just to be chosen. They lower their gaze, bite their tongue, pretend not to know too much, all for the comfort of a man who can't handle their power. But not you. You don't play that game. You don't shrink your volume, dilute your opinions, or dim your fire just to appear more feminine. Because your femininity doesn't come with performance, it comes with presence. And that kind of presence doesn't ask for permission. You're not interested in approval that comes at the cost of authenticity. You've been called too intense, too smart, too ambitious, and too independent. But what they really mean is too unmanageable. You won't play the good girl who nods along. You won't pretend you're helpless so someone can feel heroic. You're not here to feed fragile egos. You're here to be real, and that alone terrifies the insecure. You've had men try to tone police you, compete with you, reduce you to your looks, or remind you to stay humble, as if your confidence is a threat, as if your success is only valid when wrapped in silence. And when you don't respond with flattery or flirtation, they turn cold. Suddenly you're difficult, unapproachable, not wifey material. But what they're really saying is, you won't bend, and that's the point. You weren't born to bend, you were born to lead, to build, to speak, and to exist in your full power. You understand that real femininity isn't about being soft for others, it's about being sovereign for yourself. That doesn't mean you lack grace. It means your grace isn't a costume. It means your beauty isn't bait. It means your strength isn't negotiable. You don't want love that requires a performance, you want alignment. And until that shows up, you'd rather stand alone than stand beside someone who needs you to be less to feel like more. So no, you're not too much. You're just unwilling to be a watered-down version of yourself. And that doesn't make you unlovable, it makes you unforgettable. Number 10. You don't play dumb to be liked. You've never been the type to dim your light so others can shine. You walk in with your full mind, your full voice, and your full power, and that's exactly what shakes people. You could play the game. You could pretend not to know the answer. You could ask dumb questions you already know the answer to just to stroke someone's ego. But that's not you. You don't play small just to be digestible. You've been in rooms where the moment you opened your mouth, the energy shifted. People got quiet. Not because you were loud, but because they weren't used to confidence that didn't need a performance. You speak with clarity, not arrogance. But to people who rely on being the smartest person in the room, that alone feels like an attack. And instead of leveling up, they label you too much, intimidating or aggressive. You see, playing dumb is a strategy many are taught early, especially women. Be soft, be less, don't threaten, make him feel smarter, make her feel prettier, fit in, blend in, be likable. But you burned that script a long time ago because you know that shrinking doesn't make you safer. It just makes you silent in rooms where you should be leading, and that's why people don't just like you. They either respect you, envy you, or can't stand you. But one thing they never do is ignore you. You leave an imprint without trying to, because showing up in your full intelligence without apology or permission is still radical, especially in a world that teaches women that being palatable is more important than being powerful. You challenge people just by existing. You disrupt the social order that says smart women need to soften themselves to be accepted. You refuse to flatter ignorance or make yourself smaller for approval. And for some, that makes you the villain. But the ones who are secure, they see you as the blueprint. You don't play dumb to be liked because you were never aiming for approval. You were aiming for truth, and you'd rather be alone with your mind fully alive than surrounded by people who only love you when you pretend to be less. Number 11. You see through people, and that terrifies them. You walk into a room, and within seconds you already know who's pretending, who's hurting, and who's performing for attention. Not because you're trying to be nosy, but because your intuition doesn't sleep. You don't need receipts, you don't need confessions, you just know. You feel it in your bones when someone's words don't match their energy, and while you never say it out loud, your silence speaks louder than most people's truth. You see beyond masks. And that terrifies people who rely on theirs to survive. They're used to getting away with fake personas until they meet you. You don't flinch at charm. You don't get distracted by flashy titles or smooth words. You read people like a book they didn't know they wrote. That look in your eyes, it makes liars sweat and manipulators stutter. Not because you expose them, but because you could if you wanted to. And here's what really rattles them. You don't always say what you see. You don't need to. You carry a quiet awareness that makes people feel naked. It's not judgment, it's clarity. And clarity makes the insecure feel threatened because they can't perform with someone who isn't buying the act. They can't lie to someone who sees the truth before they speak. They start to avoid you, or they try to distract you with noise, over-explaining, oversharing, overcompensating just to keep you from looking too close, but it's too late. You've already caught it. You felt the insecurity dressed up as confidence. You sensed the bitterness beneath the kindness. You heard what they didn't say. This ability isn't a vibe. It's a weapon, and not one you use recklessly. It's the reason you protect your energy so fiercely, because you don't just connect with people, you absorb them. You don't just hear them, you feel them. And that level of depth, it's rare, it's powerful. It's threatening to anyone who's been surviving on surface. You weren't made to fit in with the blind. You were made to see, and that kind of sight doesn't come with applause, it comes with distance, but that's fine with you. You'd rather stand alone in truth than be surrounded by people terrified of being seen. You were never meant to fit in. You were born to reroute the entire blueprint. They called you too much, but that was just code for more than they could handle. They labeled you cold, aloof, intimidating, because you didn't perform, conform, or shrink. And while the world kept selling the idea that you were the issue, you quietly became the standard. The truth is, you're not the problem, you're the wake-up call. You're what happens when a woman stops asking for permission and starts walking in precision. You lead without shouting, love without losing yourself, and evolve without explaining. That's why they stare. That's why they gossip. That's why they either love you fiercely or avoid you completely. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't even want that. Because people who aren't ready to meet themselves will always struggle to meet you, and that's not your burden to carry. You've broken the mold and rewrote the rules. You're not performing femininity. You are the divine expression of it. You're not desperate for attention. You are attention in its most graceful form. You don't move to impress. You move to build, to heal, to be. So let them misunderstand you. Let them talk. Let them throw stones at a throne they'll never sit on. Because while they chase trends, you embody truth. And in a world full of noise, illusions, and manufactured confidence, you, the Sigma female, remain the blueprint. If this message lit a fire in you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button and join a tribe that gets it. Like the video if you felt seen, drop a comment if you're walking this path unapologetically, and share this with another powerful woman who forgot she was the standard. This isn't just content, this is a movement. And trust me, we're just getting started.